Daniel and Vivian Okafor were, by every visible measure, successful people. Daniel was a senior manager at a logistics firm, the kind of man whose phone buzzed before sunrise and long after midnight. Vivian ran a thriving fabric boutique downtown, her name whispered with admiration among the city's fashion circles. Together, they owned a 4-bedroom home in a gated estate, drove matching SUVs, and ensured their 2 children, Emeka, 15, and Chisom, 13, never lacked a single material thing. New school year? Fresh uniforms, the best backpacks, money loaded on their carts. Birthday? Cake ordered from the finest bakery, gift-wrapped gadgets stacked on the dining table. What the children never received, however, was time. Mornings in the Okafor house were a blur. Daniel ate standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through emails between bites of toast. Vivian packed her bag while issuing instructions to the housekeeper, Margaret, who had effectively become the children's third parent. By 7 a.m., both parents were gone. Evenings were not much better. Daniel returned exhausted, ate dinner in front of the news, and retired to bed. Vivian often came home after the children were already asleep, peering briefly into their rooms before collapsing into her own. "Margaret, how were they today?" she would ask. And Margaret, who knew the full truth, that Emeka had barely touched his food, that Chisom had cried after school for reasons she wouldn't share, would simply say, "They were fine, Ma." Because what else could she say? Emeka found his companions in the streets. It started innocuously, a group of older boys from the next estate who hung around the junction after school, laughing too loudly, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke. They called him Sharp Guy. They listened when he talked. They asked his opinions on things. Nobody at home did that. By 16, Emeka was skipping afternoon classes. By 17, he was running errands for a man the boys called Chairman, a heavy-set fellow who drove a tinted car and never seemed to work, yet always had money. Emeka told himself he was just making friends. He told himself a lot of things. Chisom's unraveling was quieter, more interior. She had needed her mother desperately at 13, the age when girls begin to understand the world is watching them and feel terrified by it. She had sat on the edge of her parents' bed one Saturday morning, wanting to talk about the older boy at school, who kept sending her messages that made her uncomfortable. Vivian had been on a call. She had held up one finger, just a minute. And that minute had stretched into 20. And Chisom had quietly left the room and never brought it up again. Instead, she confided in a friend, who confided in another friend, who introduced her to a circle of girls whose idea of coping involved substances that numbed everything beautifully. Daniel and Vivian noticed things, of course. Parents always notice. They simply choose comfortable explanations. Emeka was going through a phase. Chisom was just being a teenager. The housekeeper's worried glances were the anxiety of an uneducated woman who didn't understand modern children. It was not until Emeka was 19 that the phone call came. Daniel was in a board meeting when his personal phone lit up with an unknown number. He almost ignored it. Something made him step out. It was a police officer. Emeka had been arrested alongside 4 other young men in connection with an armed robbery at a filling station. Nobody had been killed, but a petrol attendant had been badly beaten. The officer's voice was calm and procedural, listing details the way police officers do. And Daniel stood in the corridor of his office building and felt the floor tilt beneath him. He called Vivian. She dropped everything and drove to the station, weaving through traffic with shaking hands, her mind replaying every moment she had dismissed, every conversation she had postponed, every evening she had chosen work over presence. Chisom's crisis arrived 6 months later, a call from a hospital. She had been found unconscious in an uncompleted building with 2 other girls, an empty bottle nearby. She survived, but the recovery was long, and in the silence of hospital corridors, with their daughter pale against white sheets, Daniel and Vivian finally sat still long enough to see the truth. They had fed their children, clothed them, paid their school fees, given them every advantage money could arrange, but they had never truly shown up. They had never sat on Emeka's bed and asked, "Who are your friends? What do you dream about? What scares you?" They had never told Chisom, "You can always come to me. Nothing is too small, nothing is too embarrassing." They had provided a house. They had never built a home. The road back was neither swift nor painless. Emeka spent 14 months in a correctional facility. Daniel visited every week without fail, sometimes with nothing to say, just sitting across from his son, learning for the first time the discomfort of silence shared honestly. When Emeka came home, they started with small things: evening walks, cooking together on Sundays, Daniel putting his phone face down on the table during meals. Chisholm entered a rehabilitation program. Vivian closed her boutique 2 days a week, something her accountant strongly advised against, simply to be available, to drive Chisholm to sessions, to sit in the waiting room with a book she barely read, to be there. It was not enough to undo what had been lost, but it was a beginning. Years later, Chisholm would become a counselor working with at-risk youth. She often told the parents who sat nervously across from her desk the same thing: your child does not need a perfect parent. They need a present one. They are not asking you to have all the answers. They are asking you to stay in the room long enough to hear the question. She had learned that the hard way. So had her parents. A home is not built with money alone. It is built in the small, unremarkable moments. The dinner conversations, the bedtime check-ins, the doors left open. Children do not remember what they were given. They remember who was there.